Welcome to another episode of Business Every Day. Today in the studio, we have a gentleman who has owned a business, who has had a career, who is in the process of having things change and decisions are being made. And I'm really tremendously excited about today's conversation. And as a point of pride, this is actually a relative. Not just a relative, my father. And we get to talk today on the podcast about his career and business decisions and how he has been where he has been brought to today. And we're going to see where this conversation goes. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself because I'm not going to actually say who you are because I've done that now twice and it's kind of embarrassing. So who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Barry Willms. I have been a lawyer for almost 30 years now and been in all kinds of different situations with that and also in leadership development situations. So happy to talk about both or all or none of the above.
All right, we'll see what we get into today. For the sake of the conversation, I'm going to call you Barry.
That works. That works. That's the name my mama gave me.
So Barry, what industry are you in? And if you can actually, with that question, how did you get started? And I feel like I know a lot of the insider details, so I feel almost bad asking. But you started not pursuing this career, to my understanding, at all. And you kind of just decided to go into it for other reasons than maybe the typical person would. And so I will turn it over to you to actually tell your story, but how did you get into the legal industry?
Well, that's a lot longer conversation than we probably have. So when I graduated from college and I got my bachelor's degree, my wife and I were trying to decide what the next steps would be. And I remember going to a park. We were living in Georgia at the time. And, we are Christian, we are kingdom-minded in everything that we do. And so we were praying about, what's the next step? We felt like college wasn't sufficient or wasn't done with that part of my life. And yet so many of my presuppositions, I guess, would be that I would probably go into the pastorate. My father is a pastor. I have a brother who's a pastor. I have cousins who are pastors. I got uncles that are pastors.
Natural gateway.
It was a natural thing for me. We had been involved in missions. That's where your mother and I met, was overseas doing missions work. And so that was the kind of the decision point. And then somewhere in that conversation, and I don't remember the specifics, we started thinking about, well, if we were ever going to go to another country and be missionaries, what would be a degree that might allow us to get into places that perhaps somebody with a theology degree could not get into? Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the nexus of our conversation. That was that germinating thought. It's like, well, what else is there? And I had undergrad in political science, and so the law just seemed a natural next step. And as we prayed about it and we talked about it, that became the next sort of decision point. And then from there, the next step was for me to take the LSAT, which was the test you have to take in order to get into
entry.
To get to law school.
Okay.
Correct. And I did well on that one and got accepted at a couple of different places. And so that was kind of the starting off point. It was like, okay, if it's not the seminary, then law school, may not seem like a natural next step.
One or the other. Got
it. That became the next step for us. So that's literally how we got into it.
I mean, depending on your sect of Christendom, one legalism is very much a part of it. So in some ways, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, but it had that mindset of, what do we want to use it for? Mm-hmm. And that was kind of our thought process at the time in our early 20s.
So was there any thought process towards being career attorney, or we need to make a certain lifestyle or income, or you even knew an attorney that you could kind of ask questions of, okay, this is the kind of lifestyle that I'm expected to live into or I want to live into? Like, was there any sort of that background
I had
conversation?
never met a lawyer or talked to a lawyer before I made the decision. Not once. I don't have any, to my knowledge, at the time at least. I had a cousin who was a lawyer, but I had never talked to him about it. I didn't have any connections at that point in my life with him. And it was strictly a sort of what's the next step decision. Never thought about lifestyle, never thought about what that decision might mean for us as a couple and us as a family. It was just the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of the next step kind of a person. I don't always see the final destination, but I definitely see what the next step is, and that was what was right for us.
Mm-hmm. In some of my previous conversations, I've asked the question about the reaction from friends and family of, you tell them that you're going to start this business or enter this industry, and they all respond and react in a certain way. You not having legal influences in your spheres or anything like that, what was the response from friends and family when you say, hey, you thought we were going to go be missionaries, and actually we're going to law school? Like, what was that response?
It was, I won't say it was negative. It wasn't positive either. It was just sort of like, okay, that sounds about right for what you normally do. It's sort of a strange decision.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't really a context for conversation about it. So it wasn't something that when I got together with my family, we would discuss it very much because there wasn't a context for it.
Got it.
All I could say was I felt like this was the next step that we were supposed to take, and we were going to take it and see where it led.
Yeah, so the process of becoming an attorney requires, I believe it's 3 years of post-bachelor's degree, and in that place, are you working while you are getting your education? Is your wife working? Like, how are you functioning? I mean, this is the question of most entrepreneurs. Like, how do you function until you are ready to operate in that role? Like, how are you guys surviving and functioning in that place?
So my wife is a nurse, and she was working at that time, and we just had felt like in the long term, we wanted her to be able to work as little as possible or none at all and stay home and raise our kids. But at the time, that was just impossible. So yes, you're correct in that law school is 3-year degree post your bachelor's degree. And this isn't universally true, but for most, kind of ABA schools, American Bar Association schools, your first year is full-time and you're not allowed to have employment during that year.
Okay.
And so the thinking ostensibly behind that is that you're focused and you have plenty to do as it is. In my second year, I started to take part-time work, and that carried on through the third year as well.
As an attorney, as a
clerk for a local law practice.
Okay. So starting to get the feelers of like, what does it mean to be in the legal sphere?
And it helped me to understand what I didn't want to do in some ways.
So from that part-time, what did you learn about you were completely green coming into this industry, and then you start working as a part-time, clerk or, and you get exposed to attorney life. And what do you like see and learn and like, oh dear heavens, what have I entered into? And I don't know the answer to that question or even stories.
So, it was a single lawyer and a single secretary and myself, and it was a plaintiff's firm. And so most of his business was walk-in, meaning somebody had a car wreck, somebody had a personal injury, somebody had contract dispute, maybe drafting a will. And so what I was primarily doing in the back office was paperwork. I was writing things. I was doing a little bit of research for him, sometimes running errands, that type of thing. Not a lot of client contact. It was mostly behind the scenes, drafting little paragraphs here and there, communicating to clients, that kind of thing. What I have subsequently found to be true is that's really what most lawyers do.
Paperwork
is behind the scenes paperwork, and we can delve into that a bit more later. But that was my first experience with kind of what is legal work, and then watching him, and it's sort of a feast or famine kind of role, because as a plaintiff's lawyer, most of your work is on a contingency fee basis, meaning you don't make any money unless you win, and then you win, you get a percentage of that person's compensation on that particular matter. But that could take years. And so to build up to the point of being able to sustain yourself can take a long time.
So it's like a gamble industry. Everything's on commission, essentially.
It's commission, but it's worse than that in some ways, because if you have any case of any size, then you have to have experts that tell about the car crash or something like that, or some medical injury or something. So the lawyer basically has to pay those fees out of pocket in anticipation of winning at the end. Now, legally, he can go after the person for those fees, even though not for him individually, but for the expenditures that he's had. But most of the time, it's really with the anticipation of getting a windfall at the end. So if somebody wins $1 million, first you take your 30% or whatever you've agreed to, and then you subtract out those expenses along the way, and then what's left that person gets.
Oh my. So it's not even like the real estate industry where you get a commission upon a sale. It's you are paying big dollars into the project before it even comes to...
The bigger the case, the more expenditures you're going to have. You might have court reporter expenses, you might have accident investigation people, you might have experts, you might take depositions, all those kinds of things.
So for context, this is what year?
1993 is when I was in my second year of law school.
Okay, so 93. And do you recall about what the compensation was for a clerk in that time?
Oh yeah, I made $5.50 an hour.
$5.50 as a clerk.
As a matter of fact, I recall now that I was offered $5, and I went home and talked to my wife, and she said, "Absolutely not. You will not work for $5 an hour." And so she made me go back and say, "I can work for this," and that's what it ended up being.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you're doing this part-time job, and then you graduate from law school. And you still have to take, just like medical doctors, there's the medical boards. You still have to take a legal board in order to be certified as a barred attorney, correct?
There is a 2-day examination in Georgia where I took the bar. There is a Georgia portion for 1 day, and then there's the national portion for the second day. Ironically, just this week, I think it was Washington State, it became the second state the Supreme Court of that state has said that you do not have to take the bar to become a lawyer in that state.
Oh, interesting.
But when I was there, it was a 2-day ordeal, and it was very gut-wrenching. And
you've done 3 years worth of work,
yes.
And now you have to pass a test in order to actually do what you've set out to do.
Well, in my third year of law school, back in those days, you were allowed to take your bar exam during your third year. I don't think that's the case anymore. But back in the day, so I was working part-time, I went to school full-time, and I was taking a bar exam prep class about 3 or 4 hours a day. In anticipation of taking the exam mid second semester of the third year, in the hopes of both graduating and passing the bar, so I can then start my law practice immediately thereafter.
And just as a side note, I believe I was born at that same time too.
Well, if you want to dig into family history, you were born in November of my second year, so I was going into second year exams just as we were incorporating you into the family. So it was interesting times.
It easy. Come on. I like it. I'm going to fast forward for a second and say you have been a manager of many, many attorneys, especially a lot of them coming out of recent law school. In your experience, just to give some context, you did pass the bar first time.
Yes.
From what you've been exposed to, is that a common experience for attorneys, or is it very common to see newly graduate attorneys go back 2, 3, 4, even 5 times to take the bar exam at the end of their education?
So it varies by school and by state. So there's some states that are viewed as more difficult than other states in terms of the state portion, the one day. When I was going to school, I went to a state university in Georgia, and we had the highest percentage pass rate for the bar. There were other schools in the area that cost a whole lot more, private schools, etc. But even there, they were well over 80% passage rate at the time. I don't know what it is today, but that was always a nerve-wracking moment when you got the notification of passage or not. There's no doubt.
Mm-hmm. So you graduate, you pass the bar. How quickly after you pass the bar did you seek work or get a job, or like how did you even know what direction to go into? Because it's like, okay, you've graduated, you spent all this time, this money, this effort to graduate, and then all of a sudden it's like, become an attorney. What does that even mean? Like, what do you go work for a firm? Do you go work for an office? Go work as a clerk again? Like, how did you even like figure out how to narrow in what direction to go from passing the bar?
So I passed the bar in spring of 95. I graduated in May of 95. And during that semester, that last semester of law school, there's kind of different categories of ways people get jobs. So there's a week or sometimes 2 weeks where sort of quote unquote the big firms come into town and they interview people and those kinds of things. At my school, they really only went after like the top 5, maybe the top 6 people, which I was not a part of. And so you're relying on sort of the career services department at the law school for literally at the day in the day there it was a paper binder where you flip over page after page of these are opportunities available for lawyers. And it was just interesting because I got a phone call out of the blue by, at the time, and it might be still today, one of the top law firms in Atlanta. And I was a little dumbfounded on the call because I didn't know that I had applied there. It turns out that at my law school career office, there was what was called a blind firm offer that I had filled out an application for that had not identified what law firm it was.
Okay.
And they called me, and I don't remember the timing, but it was somewhere in summer of that year, and I started to work for them in September of that year.
Okay. So pretty quickly after graduation and passing and all that other stuff, you went to work for a law firm in Atlanta. And at the time, first-year lawyer, what was the expectation in regards to like hours worked, income generated, like, and what did you do?
So I started in essentially a whole new industry at the time. So we were involved in mass tort litigation, which means, you know, like if you get involved in a lawsuit, that's a single plaintiff against a single defendant. When something happens to people over and over or to masses of people, typically as it relates to pharmaceuticals, things that you might ingest, you know, food, a car that gets recalled, you know, all these kinds of things. That's considered a mass tort where you may have thousands of plaintiffs that have essentially the same injury and the same claim, and then they go after for compensation against whoever the manufacturer of that product was. And then I, as a lawyer for the defense of that, was involved in what's called the discovery process. And so what that means is in a lawsuit, one side asks the other side for documentations about whatever subject matter is relevant. And our job was to go to the client and find that information, bring it back into a file room, make copies of it. And then the lawyers, like myself, there were 28 of us that were hired initially. We would review that material and base it on what the other side had asked for, and categorize it based upon the topics or the subject matter, whether it was confidential or was there anything in that document that was privileged that we weren't required or couldn't produce to the other side, and did that 8 hours a day.
Sounds so thrilling.
Sat in our little cube farm. It was interesting. I had never sat in this little 3x3, whatever it was, cubicle.
You were so excited to be like, this is what I've been working towards.
Yeah, and everything is based on the billable hour. So you track all of your time associated with what activity you are doing, and that's the basis on which the firm then bills the client, and ostensibly that's how I get paid.
So you have this experience where, you get your first job, you got this blind resume that's been out there, and you get hired, and now you're, sorting papers and redacting documents, and you're in a, giant workspace in a cube farm. And is there any sort of existential experience where you go, what am I doing? I thought I was going to go to court. I thought I was going to be doing this or doing that. Like, why am I here? Do I need to change careers? Like, is there any sort of introspective experience in that first year where you're just grappling with what it means to be an attorney?
What we were working on was considered highly confidential. And so we were in a room we had a security guard at the front, we had swipe cards, and for those of you old enough to remember phones that were on the wall and had a cord, our group of about 30 lawyers that grew to 100 at one point had one phone on the wall. So if my wife happened to call, hey Barry, there's a call, everybody knew, and I'm standing in the middle of the room with this phone attached to my head. Not like today with cell phones and the like.
Such a group experience.
So it got to me after a while, that whole experience. So that first sort of tranche of my career, I did that for about 18 months. And at that point, it was like, I just don't know if I can do this anymore. It was very repetitive, of course. It was never ending. The atmosphere was not that great. It wasn't what I was looking for. And so at that point, I was looking for a change.
And what change came from that experience?
So I had, at that time, a number of people started asking me questions and asking me to do certain legal work for them. So I had a guy at my church that wanted to start a corporation. I had some people that wanted wills done. I had several other scenarios come my way, and it felt like at that point, maybe this was an opportunity to start my own practice. Hang on my own shield, no idea what I'm doing, didn't know where the courtroom was, none of that stuff. And so I just took a jump and got a little office and tried to make it work.
Okay, and so you branch out on your own, and you are doing, I guess that would be categorized as like estate planning or incorporation law, or
it was everything.
It was just whatever paid the bills.
I did family law. I did I did an adoption during that time. Just lots of wills, little contract disputes, and the context of my office was that it was in a 3-company strip mall.
Okay.
So really small, but it was downtown in a small town in Georgia. And so I had a lot of walk-in traffic. How should I say this? Non-paying walk-in traffic.
Okay.
So I had a lot of people just sort of show up, tell me all their troubles, and, leave. And so not always a financially productive way of running a business.
What I would give to be there at that time, to just sit there and, how do you handle this conversation of someone comes in, tells you your problems and leave, and the social awkwardness of that, and trying to get to okay, do you need my services? Do you not need let's be legit about this. What are you doing?
Yeah, and there was a lot of that. People are looking for free legal advice, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
They had a personal issue. They had oftentimes it was a family dispute over something. But just the context I was working with in that scenario, most of them were not able to hire me to do anything. I was there to give free advice.
Okay. So did you go from, first year, couple year attorney, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to strike it on my own because it feels like I got these opportunities coming my way. You pursue those, you work with those. And then do you have this grand vision about creating your own law firm, or, hey, this owning my own business thing is like really my bread and butter, my passion in life? Or like, where are you at in regards to career mindset and personal vision statement mindset, of saying, what is my life going to look like in this relationship with this career path? Is it owning my own business? Is it going back into the workflow? What is that conversation inside of Barry?
So it sort of depended on the day. So that year we had our twins born, adding to our family.
You have a lot of career events and family edition events at the same time.
So in some ways it was difficult to focus on the career aspect.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that it allowed for us to do, some may view this as positive, some may view it as negative, but I was able to go home a lot and help my wife work through now having 4 kids at home, just dealing with life, and the addition of 2 sons at the same time was a lot more traumatic than we anticipated, I guess.
Yeah.
So my mind wasn't really on the career aspect. It was the opportunity that it provided for me to be able to do those family things.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it stabilized, as I got into over a year into it, I guess I felt like that particular type of law that I was working on was so scattered that it didn't allow me to have the joy that I wanted in work. I didn't get a lot of colleague interaction.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have there weren't like 6 of us in a room where we could talk about the legal issues.
Were you running completely solo at the time?
I was 100% solo.
Okay.
Yeah. I was next to a printing shop. So
what's that?
Yeah, exactly. It's a new day. But back in the day,
like
when
a
you wanted
Kinko's.
to make, yeah, exactly right, a FedEx office, that kind of
Okay.
thing. It was a private company, but so there was no human connection on the legal or the work environment side. And so I started to think about, could I really do this long term? And I just decided I didn't want to do it long term by myself.
So you decide that, okay, this is what I don't want to do. How do you flow into this is what I do want to do? Like, how do you make that jump? I think for me, that's always the question of like, I think it's so much easier to identify what I don't want to do than it is to identify what I do want to do. And probably that's other people's problem as well.
So I don't really look at it as what do I want to do. I look at what opportunities are presented to me and make those decisions and determinations based upon what is available, right? So in that context, I was contacted by that previous law firm and was offered a position that was different than what I had, that moved me really into more of the growing technical component to what our job was.
Okay.
So that would have been 1998, and in 1998, I had been those previous years working on a large mass tort matter, and there was a government settlement that was involved. All 50 states were involved, and one of the requirements of our client was we had to then put all of those documents that we had produced and put them on the internet. And so we created
internet.
Yes, back in the day, 1998. We were, if not the first, one of the first large repository of we had 20 million pages that we put online.
Gosh.
And my responsibility included putting the images along with the coding that the attorneys had put on those documents, like what was it responsive to. And keep in mind, this is scanned in paper, so it's not searchable at the time.
Yeah.
And so all the coding associated with like what we would consider today to be metadata, it wasn't back then, but it was coding associated with a image of a document, had to be searchable.
I think that's almost pre-Adobe PDF.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, it was a TIFF image.
A TIFF image.
Yeah.
I work in technology, and I don't even know what a TIFF image is.
It's basically a camera picture of a piece of paper, and we had then associated coding with that image, and it became a record online, and it's still out there today, and people have used that repository for all kinds of searching, and they use it as a means to use as examples of how to do things. And until the Enron repository was created many years later, ours was the one everybody used. And I was so grateful when Enron happened, so they could start looking at other people's documents instead of ours.
So did they offer you, so this law firm that you worked for before, you went on your own, now they've contacted you back, did they offer you a temporary position, a full-time position? What was the offer that made you go, okay, I think it's time to leave this scattered practice, close the doors, and go back into corporate?
It was a full-time gig for me. And the interesting part wasn't that the lawsuit was different, it's my role in it was different. And it opened up all kinds of new avenues for me from a technical standpoint. I learned all about searching syntax. And I remember my first day. I got back there and I was handed, I think it was an 8-page printed out search syntax string. And I was told, this search doesn't work. Find the error.
Oh my gosh.
And no kidding. I'm looking at this piece of 6 or 7 pages of symbols and things like, where is the hanging Chad? Like back in, from where is the missing parentheses? And I found it, and then it worked. So that was my foray into the technology world of lawyers. Yeah.
So you had this like dip back into an emerging industry, which I think now is called e-discovery law, but you're kind of on like the bleeding edge of what that even meant, and this incorporation of the internet and computers and databases and all this other stuff. Like that environment, is that kind of what you were looking for in regards to like excitement and culture and now interacting with people and having opportunity to grow in leadership and all those other things? Like, is that what you were looking for? Or was there something else that like attracted you into that sect of the industry?
Well, it was the unknown that attracted me in many ways. So there was no e-discovery at the time. So this would have been in '98 when I went back to the law firm, and the first sort of technological and database reality for me was when I was asked to lead my first team, and there were 11 lawyers, and their entire job was doing what most people think lawyers do, which is write responses to discovery requests. There's things called interrogatories, there's answers, there's all kinds of things that lawyers have to do. And because we were a mass tort, meaning we had cases all over the country, hundreds of cases, and they always asked essentially the same thing. So we created the first database I ever worked with was a SQL database, and we created these are the typical questions that we get asked. These are the approved responses that our client and the lawyers involved have provided, and then my team's responsibility was to craft all that into a document and then file it in whatever location, or actually send it to local counsel to file it.
Okay.
So that was my first touch with really the technical component of it. And then in 2001, so I did that for a couple years, I was asked by that firm to start a brand new project, moving from one mass tort client to another.
Okay.
And essentially was told, here's a file room. It was an entire floor of a building that was down the street from where the law firm was. And there was filing cabinets and there was shelving. And they said, we want you to start a whole new project. First thing you do is get rid of all this stuff and start hiring lawyers, because you're not going to be able to use our lawyers. You have to get new lawyers to do this. So that was my foray as sort of the first big responsibility, first leadership component for me. And what I did was I hired 10 lawyers from an agency in town, and we started review. And literally, I can't remember the exact date, but I think I hired them on something like August 30 or August 31 of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a paperwork snafu that happened over the weekend, and it was like it took another several days for us to get back into the office, and literally the next day was 9/11. And so I'm at the main office, in my office at the main firm building when 9/11 happened, and my secretary comes running down the hall and said, "Hey, you got to come down here to the conference room." They pulled a TV in.
Whoa.
And we were in, you don't remember this, but back in at that moment, there was a lot of concern about what was still in the sky. We didn't know what was going on, and we were in the tallest building in Atlanta.
Okay.
So our head of the company said, "Everybody go home."
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't just go home. My whole team was over in another building, so I had to go across the street, down the street a little ways, and tell everybody, "Okay, we're going home, and we're going to see how what shakes out over the next few days." And so that was the start of my project. Was essentially 9/11.
Golly. The next question that actually comes to mind for me is that you are jumping into this emerging industry. You're leading teams. You're doing this huge conversion from paper to digital, and not once have I heard you talk about a courtroom as of yet. And I'm curious around the misconceptions of what it means to be a lawyer.
Right.
And I think I'm a little biased or maybe informed in this because I grew up, with this conversation. But even for the people that I've talked to, like, oh, I must get an attorney. I need to talk to a lawyer, and like what that looks like. And so I was just going to ask, like, what are some just common misconceptions on what it means to be a lawyer and the most common jobs that a lawyer does?
I think the worst things that have ever happened to my industry and some of the others is some of the TV shows. And so lawyer TV shows, cop TV shows, CSI TV shows, all that kind of stuff lends itself to everybody thinking that all of life's problems gets resolved in 30 minutes or less, or 60 minutes or less.
Okay.
That every lawyer is this good-looking guy or gal in a suit and going to the courtroom, and they're going to make that person confess on the stand, and like none of that's true. There's all kinds of reasons for that, but primarily is that more than 90% of all cases get settled. They don't ever see the courtroom. And again, keep in mind there's two types essentially. There's the criminal cases, and then there's the civil cases. I've not been involved in the criminal ones. Those are self-explanatory. Somebody has some offense, the police arrest them, they go to court, they have some representation. The prosecutor, that's usually a county or a state or a federal official, says this person did X, Y, Z. They go to a jury. In a civil matter, the whole point of a civil matter is there's not supposed to be surprises. You're not allowed to hide things from the other side. All of the on the stand, what would you call it, testimony that's being given in a courtroom has all been done before in a deposition.
Okay.
It's all videotaped already. You should know all the answers to every question. I mean, that's kind of the lawyer thing. You don't ever ask a question that you don't know the answer to, because that person on the stand will, kill your story that you're trying to make. So if for example, like the cases that I was working on are company bet the company, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars at stake, they're not going to let me do a court case. The only time that I was at court for any of those matters was over this database of this repository that was online, and the other side wanted us to produce documents that were already online. And I was asked to go out to a case in San Diego, and I had to argue on our behalf that those documents are already there. Why should we spend more time doing it? But most of the time, the senior partner who's a trial lawyer will come in, swoop in the last minute and do the trial, if in fact there is a trial. But most of the work, and like I said, most cases don't go to trial, most of the work is done behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like in the case of Mass Tort, because that's what I know, you have a partner or a group of partners that get the client, get the work, so to speak. And then you have other partners that are responsible for different things. You have groups that are responsible for the documents, groups that are responsible for the witnesses and the depositions and those kinds of things. And then under those are teams of lawyers actually doing the depositions or actually doing the review of the documents or those kinds of things. And so that one client, you might have 2 or 3 partners that they actually talk to, and then there's 150 or 200 lawyers doing the work.
Okay.
Right? So at the peak of our case, we had over 100 lawyers working just on the document side. So that's pretty typical. And certainly if you're doing mergers and acquisitions, it's all paperwork. You're drafting responses, you're changing the contract, you're doing all these things, but I would venture to guess 10% or less of lawyers have ever been in a courtroom. So there's such a fallacy that we have this perception based upon what people see on TV,
right?
Of what lawyers do. Oh, it's all about the courtroom and getting that gotcha moment. That almost never
Everybody
happens.
wears a suit, it's clean shaven, slick back hair. Everybody drives a Porsche. They work in a high rise in downtown New York City. It looks like this. They make this much money. They do that. And
it comes to mind. There's this scene from a movie. I haven't actually seen the movie, but I've seen this scene over and over on social media. And I think her name is Reese Witherspoon, and she's in this lawyer. She's a lawyer or a law student, I think, and she's talking to this person on the stand about a crime that was committed, and the person on the stand had a permanent, like made her hair curly.
Yeah.
And I was just, when I watched it, I go like it was a gotcha moment, because if you would have had, your hair is still curly, but you took a shower, but everybody knows that if you have a permanent, that you don't take a shower for this many hours. And I'm going like, that would never happen because this criminal matter will probably take 12 or 18 months to happen. It's not going to happen the day that you did your hair or any of that kind of stuff. It's just a complete fallacy.
Okay.
So nothing like
pop your
reality.
Bubble, lawyers.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're thinking about becoming a lawyer, odds are you're going to be in an office building, never see the inside of the courtroom, and you're just going to be working on Excel or some sort of other document
Word
platform
documents,
for your entire career.
So again, keeping in mind that there is criminal, which you would probably go to court a lot. If you are a public defender, if you are a defense attorney, for a criminal defense attorney, or a prosecutor, you're going to court all the time. But again, 99% of those cases are getting settled.
Right.
The person that gets a $500 lawyer because the court appoints them to represent somebody, they need representation, so they get this guy that's at the courtroom just waiting to be picked. They've never seen this person. They've never seen the file, and they see the file, and then they make some argument, and then there's some agreement, and then, okay, you get time served, or you get whatever. So those kind of folks are in the courtroom all the time. And maybe, that changes the percentages a little bit. But if you are involved in any kind of major law firm work, the chances of you seeing the courtroom are pretty small. You might see it as you drive by. You might use the courtroom, a conference room in the courthouse to do your deposition, but the chances of you being before a judge are pretty small.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So to swing it back to you, in the timeline of conversation, you are now in the early 2000s. You have jumped from, you started career, went on your own, back in corporate, now starting to do this teams thing. You're starting to lead teams and training. And is there a thought process around a career mindset? Because where we started with the conversation was you decided to jump into becoming an attorney for other reasons, other missional reasons and things like that. And so now you're in a career. And have you had this is my vision, this is my goal, I want to eventually grow into this role that I've heard about? Or like, is there any sort of direction in regards to a goal of what you are trying to aspire to in this industry?
Not an external goal, or because of what I was doing was emerging.
Mm-hmm.
It had never been done before.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have like role models to look at and say XYZ person, I could do that. So I was amongst all the people, all the lawyers working at that particular time were all doing this for the first time. So for me, it was more of an internal thing where I was saying, I really enjoy doing X. And in my case, it was working with leaders, training people, doing a lot of like client presentations.
Mm-hmm.
One of my roles over the years has been sort of the storyteller of our marketplace distinctives.
Okay.
How do I interpret between a lawyer and a IT person, or a lawyer and a business person whose worlds don't collide ever? And a lawyer's trained to ask certain questions from a certain perspective, but if I could call them normal people, non-lawyers,
Gotcha.
don't understand the context of why you're asking the question or why you're leading them to a conclusion. So a lot of my role has been between clients and our law firm or our company, and trying to help people understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was training leaders. Part of that is helping people understand, like, how do you manage people? How do you budget, and how do you track metrics towards that budget? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, I gotcha. So in regards to you, it doesn't seem like there was a particular, I mean, it was an emerging industry. So you didn't have this, oh, that person has a position that really looks ideal. It's not a dream. It's not a goal. And so you're kind of just internally developing, this is what success looks like. And just as like a synopsis thing, do you have a definition of what it looks like to be successful for you?
That's a hard question. Honestly, my career has never been at the forefront of my life or my thinking.
Go on.
That just sounds weird, I know, but for me, it's always been a means to an end. I'm in this career because that's where God has me, and I'm able to help as many people as I can. But it's really to provide for my family, to do all the other things that we like to do. So I've never had that burning, oh, I'd like to make this much money, or oh, I'd like to have this kind of credential, or I have just found that so many people in my profession have this sort of snooty academic air about them.
Yeah.
That just turns me off. I enjoy going to conferences where we're discussing things, and we're talking about new subject matter and that type of thing. But when they go into the whole philosophical academic feel, it turns me off completely.
Yeah.
I just don't have that kind of mindset. To me, it's like a means to an end. It's just something that I do. I love doing what I do, but it's not the passion of my life.
Mm-hmm. The career not being the focus and having a little bit of insider knowledge, like, how has that influenced your external projects or ambitions, or what's a really good way to ask I know you're involved in external things beyond your career, and that includes a blog and a study of leadership and these aspirations to, like you said, help and influence people. Like, how have those components been a part of this journey?
Kind of to circle back to your previous point and tie it in, there's a lot of people that view their career as their life. And they socialize at work, and that's their friend circle, that's their community, that's their go-to for everything. That's where they get their sense of worth or identity. That's never been the case for me. My family and my church family and all of that is my community. I had zero interest after work is done going out for drinks with the guys at work. Not, if you want to do that, that's fine. But I have no interest in it because I just want to go home. I'm done working. That the idea of let's socialize together after work, or let's go on a Saturday and let's meet all our I have no interest in that.
Okay.
But when your entire existence is wrapped up in the work and everything becomes an appendage to that, then I can see that why that is important to people. For me, as I've said twice now, it's a means to an end. Leadership development is huge for me, which is why I started the blog. Family connection is huge to me, so time away from the office is important to me. I'm not looking for more hours at work. Whether it's personal outlets like writing the blog or writing songs or being involved in small groups at my church or neighborhood things, that's where I get my sense of worth and identity from versus accolades at work or any of that kind of thing.
Yeah. I want to focus in on it for a moment on the blog. Tell me, what is the blog? Where can it be found? And give me a little bit of your heart and mindset behind the reason you created it.
So it's beingaleader.blog. And I started it in January of 2019.
Okay.
And it's a weekly blog. My whole intent is two thoughts behind it. One is everybody is a leader in some capacity, whether they know it or not. So the concept of being a leader rather than becoming a leader, or some people say you're born a leader, all those things doesn't matter to me. You are a leader in some capacity. And as such, the number 2 point is I want there to be a non-structured, contemporaneous thought that I'm having today that becomes tomorrow's blog. So almost always I draft my blog on Mondays and it gets published Tuesday morning.
Okay.
I unless I'm traveling overseas, I don't plan ahead. I don't structure it. I want it to be what I'm thinking about today. So it's often very pithy. It's not, deep or anything, but it's intended for a mom, a baseball coach, a small group leader, somebody that works in this industry or that, doesn't matter. They're leading somebody. They need to understand what it is that motivates people, what inspires people. They need to have certain communication styles. They need to understand how to deal with conflict. All these things, dealing with future aspirations and how do you deal with past hurts, and trying to bring all this into a leadership context. And trying to demystify leadership a little bit.
Okay.
That it's not for all those people way at the top, but everybody's a leader. So being a leader, this is how I should act.
Okay.
This is how I should communicate, whether it's written or verbal. This is how I should treat people. I mean, all those kinds of things. Whatever's going on in this little head right here on Monday, that's what you're going to find about on Tuesdays.
Okay. So where can they find this blog if people want to follow along in this journey of here's what my experience has been of the blog and reading it over the years and stuff like that. I call it like the commuter conversation. It's 5 minutes, it's 10 minutes. You do a quick read, you do a quick listen, or however you want to consume the material. And it's just a thought of the day regarding leadership to get your brain immersed in that thought process. But that's my experience of the blog. But where can people find it and subscribe to your journey?
So the website is beingaleader.blog.
Okay, beingaleader.blog. So you have this avenue of the blog. Is there any sort of, this will tie into a bigger question, but what's the dream? Like, there's a blog out there and you're writing it to, your experience with your church and with your teams at work and all those things. Like you've, from what I know in the background conversation of, you've seen a deficit in the attributes of leadership and you want to increase people's understanding and, like you said, demystify it. But is there a goal or a dream with this avenue of creativity, or is it just something that is expressing your thought pattern and is just very like somebody would say journaling, or like this is just my therapy in life?
So it's partly therapy, but it's also I wanted to start something.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking about it for a long time. Like, I guess the age in which I grew up, everything was done long form.
Okay.
There wasn't YouTube, there wasn't Twitter, there wasn't TikTok, there wasn't any of this kind of social media platform. So to start in the process, I always felt like I had to write a book.
Okay.
And so it took a while for me to get to the point where I just need to get this out of me and put it on a screen so I can move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, a weekly cadence of putting out whatever my contemporaneous thought is on leadership helped me kind of get it out there. It forces a structure on me to make sure I do it. And I did put the first year's worth of blogs into a ebook that you can get on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is, get as much subject matter information on leadership out to people, demystify it, that it's not just for those leaders up there on whatever it is, business, church, family, society, but you're a leader and you need to have these attributes if you're going to effectively lead, whether it's your family or your team or a small group or whatever.
I got you. So how does that incorporate into the larger dream, or is there a large dream? I know you talked about at the beginning there was never this big goal, dream, or something like that, and you kind of just did what's next. At this point in your life and career and just living circumstance, is there a dream of how these different attributes of what you've learned and what you've understood of this is a passion or creativity or enjoyment, like, is there a singularity of like, this is a direction that I hope to go into?
So for me, the career component of this is almost irrelevant. Other than I love training leaders in that context and in that industry. But it's about leadership development for me. And I think there's, if I was going to force to put down on paper what I would love to do one day is to have a convergence of leadership development and how it connects to family, community, whether you're in a church or not. Like, how do you, as a father, how do I lead my family? How do I train the next generation? There's a lot of families that are broken, that don't have one parent or the other. And so a lot of kids, I think, are being raised, in my view, with some deficit that they're missing. And part of that is leadership development, I think. How do I lead? Like, the examples aren't there, or I wasn't raised with those examples. So whether it's in the church, whether it's in your family, whether it's in the community, or whether it's in the workplace, that's what I want to continue to do, is to train leaders at all those levels to be, go to the next level.
Okay.
Be a better communicator, be a more effective, conflict resolver, be a better mediator. How do you ask questions that elicit the response that get people thinking, not so much in a therapy scenario, but in terms of how it relates to the leadership problem that I'm dealing with.
Okay. Got it. So I'm going to ask the obvious question of like, what are you doing now, and what do you think you will be doing in or at the next 5 years, like in the next 5 years to the next 5-year mark? Like, because you've had this 25-year career of where it being kind of legal centric. You had this component influence of striking out on my own to be able to focus on internal and family, and then you had this change almost in industry where you focused on this emergence of a new industry and finding your own alley within that industry of training leaders and developing teams and having the insider scoop. I know that season has stopped as of right now, and you're in this in-between space. And so I'm curious as to what you are doing now And if you have any thoughts towards the 5 year, like, I've even had a lot of thoughts around, different people in leadership and conferences, the Maxwells and all the other people says you can't even plan out 5 years anymore because the world just changes so freaking fast.
Yeah.
And so maybe 5 years is the wrong word to say, but maybe in the next 12 months, like, where are you at now and kind of maybe the direction that you're headed?
So the company that I have worked for the last almost 15 years got purchased a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've done over the last 2 years is really integrate what we had developed over that past decade or so into this new corpus. So all of the teams that I'd helped supervise, and we had, upwards of 800 lawyers working, got subsumed within the greater.
Mm-hmm.
I had 8 director level executives that were my direct reports,
Mm-hmm.
and their function, my job was to find their place in the new company.
Okay.
So I did that. I did that for 18 months, and then sort of I was the last man standing. And so so right now I'm in that point where, what is the next step? What do I want to do? If I was going to go out 10 years and then work my way back, I would love to be in a place where I have, whether it's the income or whether it's the savings or whether it's the side hustle, doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability, as I move into sort of that retirement stage of life, even though I'm not sure I'll ever actually retire, to be in that stage of life where I can do things that don't require me to go to work every day.
Okay.
That I can, like you mentioned Maxwell and some of these guys, to be able to do that on a smaller scale,
Mm-hmm.
to go and teach at a church, teach at a business, do a weekend for fathers, do a weekend for emerging leaders in the music industry, do it in the IT industry.
Mm-hmm. The coaching and the training and the development of new leaders and thought processes.
Yeah, the industry is almost immaterial. It's the fact that all of these people are coming up, whatever you want to call the generation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they have as many examples as I did. And so trying to not only be an example, but to tell them there is a better way. You can skip over all the hardships in some sense by learning some skills along the way. And leadership is a skill, and you can learn it. You can get better at communicating. You can get better at all these functions of leadership. And leadership, to me, is still the most lacking thing that we have in our society, certainly at the political level. And so my goal would be to try to, this is a big goal, to rebuild the culture of leadership from the ground up.
Yeah.
So that in, your generation and beyond, then maybe some of those people will percolate to the top and we can get some sanity again at the highest levels.
I gotcha. Okay.
We're going to take over.
Yeah.
One way or the other. So that would be the goal long term. How to get there, that's yet to be determined. I'm looking at a number of things, both as from a consulting standpoint, having my own practice again, to going to work for a nonprofit. There's a number of different things that I'm looking at right now.
Okay. So how do you personally continue to develop in the area of leadership and wisdom and skill refinement? You talked a lot about the journey of what it's looked like to get where you're going, but were there things along the way that you intentionally did that have greatly affected where you are today?
So one of the early blogs that I wrote, probably back in 2019, was entitled Leading Yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the hardest thing for people to do. And the way that I have structured my own leadership development is to expose myself to mentors, most of whom are dead, right?
Yeah, it's very similar. My favorite people are all dead.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't need a physical person to be your mentor. You can have that. That's great. But there's a lot of materials out there. There's books. There's obviously podcasts nowadays. There's all the YouTube stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I love going to conferences and You spend your money, you get your accommodations, you get your food, your travel, but you learn one or two things that weekend about leadership. That's what I love. And then I try to bring that information back and incorporate it. So leading yourself is doing all of those things, not being so completely finished with your day without learning something. And if I think there's a lot of people have a lot of free time that they don't know about because they're spending it on social media or whatever. But there's ways you can incorporate those things and still learn about whatever is interesting and important to you. And for me, it's about leadership, and it's again in any context. I will read on IT stuff, even though I'm not in the IT field. I'll read about legal things. I'll read about business. I'll read about opening your own, franchise. All these kinds of things are interesting enough. I go to a leadership training every year called the Global Leadership Institute. I've been going over 20 years. There's people from all over the world, all kinds of walks of life. Some of the most interesting information and tidbits on leadership that I've learned are people from the restaurant business, the hospitality business, churches, multinational telecommunications companies. I mean, all kinds of people at different levels. Some at billion-dollar companies, some people that have their own, just their own little practice.
Yeah.
But there's always something to learn if you're willing to go look for it and seek it out. And so that's what I've always tried to do.
So if you had the ability to go back to that part in your life where you were going on a walk and you were able to, you were making the decision to go to law school, knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would impart wisdom-wise about life or leadership or career that you would impart to that person before they even went to law school? Or started. I mean, law school, it could be used universally for, going to college, could be going to this, trade school or anything like that. It's like knowing what you know now, having been in the industry, in corporate industry for 25 plus years, from growing from the grunt at the bottom to an exec at the top, and doing many different jobs in between and see different leadership styles, worked under different people. It's like, are there some tidbits that you would give that person just at the front end, making the decisions of the direction that their life is going to take?
So one thing I didn't do was talk to lawyers.
Okay.
And it's still surprising to me today, with all the information that's available, to see people go into, particularly at the college level when they're going to get their bachelor's or their master's, where they seem surprised when they go out and get a job and they realize that what they learned is completely a waste of time. From an economic standpoint, right? They may be very excited about the material. It may be enriching to them personally, whatever. But from an economic, can I get a job and can I pay a mortgage and can I take care of my kids scenario, they've never given it a thought. Or they believed what the college told them was true, even though it was a complete falsehood. So I would investigate, can I use what I'm learning to be successful after? Particularly for those folks going out and taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of student loan debt.
Right.
And they come out with $200,000 worth of student loan debt and they can make $25,000 a year. They'll never pay it back, or they'll never be able to buy a house, or all those things they have to consider that when you're 18, 19, oftentimes you don't think about.
Right.
I think we need to start thinking about those things.
Right.
So I guess there's so much information out there now to find, what is this career potential pay? What does this career require? Does my French art history degree help me in my communications career?
Right.
Maybe, maybe not. Am I willing to go to a specialized school and pay $50,000 a year for a bachelor's degree to come out with all this debt and no job prospects? And I work at the help desk for IT because I'm good at computers. It's sort of that matching up. So if you go back historically, we thought of somebody learned who had knowledge. Now nobody cares because all the knowledge is available.
Right.
Anybody can access the knowledge. It's the ability to use knowledge that's important. So I can search anything on YouTube today, but it doesn't mean I know how to do it when I'm done.
Right.
I still have to do it. And so I think the advice for some 19-year-old that's trying to think of what I want to do is, you have to start thinking about, what am I going to do with this history degree? What am I going to do with this English degree? And then talk to people who actually do those things, or research it. There's all kinds of resources available today that weren't available back then.
Right.
That you can actually find out. Like, I'll give you an example. When you are 15 and you hear about that person makes $30,000 a year, that's a lot of money. But your perspective changes when you have a mortgage, and when you have student loan debt, and you have a family, and you have kids that want to eat and go to baseball, and all of a sudden that $30,000 isn't enough, even though your whole trajectory of your life since you were 15 was towards that goal. So it's about perspective. And so talking to people in that field, would it be interesting? What would I need to do to get there? And can I afford to be there when I get there?
Right. Right. Well, and even the influences, I would say, of your economic environment will have an influence on that conversation, because, like, if everybody in your economic influence, the environment that you're in, makes $50,000 a year, then you're going to have a certain perspective be presented. Whereas everybody in your sphere makes 100, if everybody makes 200, like, everything will influence your perspective of what's possible, what's standard, what's acceptable. And having a broad sense, I think you've had some blog posts about having a multifaceted input experience in regards to your leadership and who you're learning from, and it not just be singular. It's not just people who are like you or think like you, or even who are in the same industry, but it's that multifaceted experience that really creates a well-rounded thought process.
And I think one thing that's different about today than 30 years ago when I started this is the focus on a singular source of income was the way to go back then.
Okay.
I would advise today, you look for multiple sources. And not just from you might get laid off perspective, but because you're able to follow your dream, I think, a little bit better when you have sources of income that take care of your needs, but allow you the opportunity to, let's say, take a flyer, go after something that maybe is risky. But if you have a full-time job that is your single source of income, then taking a flyer is a lot more tenuous.
Right.
Can I afford to risk it all?
Is so much worse.
So if you're making $100,000 at one job, that is a different thing than making $100,000 from 4 different jobs. So replacing a $25,000 job because I took a risk on something is different than risking it on the single source of income.
Right.
So that would be my encouragement, is try to find, people call it different things, side hustle, whatever. I think multiple streams of income should be your goal today rather than a single source.
That's so interesting, even coming from somebody within, a big corporate industry, somebody who, leads teams and does all this other stuff. Like, it's an interesting conversation economically that I think will be more revealed as we do more episodes and have more conversations. That I agree that the way of the future is so much more to do with multi-source income, multi-source skill sets, it's the diversification of one's life, that because industries are so much more vulnerable now, I think, because, a single person makes a tweet, a single lawsuit comes out, and everybody now knows about it, where the catastrophic failure of something is just like the catastrophic growth of something is so much faster. The way things crash and burn now, I think it just happens so much more quickly that it to me, as a person more on the front end of my career, it feels really vulnerable to have this thing. It was like, my entire industry could shift because of AI.
Yeah.
My entire, life's aspirations could completely shift because of this class action lawsuit, or, whatever that influence might be.
Yeah, and I think also the potential for failure is greater when you have a single source. When you have multiple sources, it's like the fear level is different. And I think kids today, their mindset needs to be about all of these streams, because it allows you the opportunity to grow in something or to pursue something that maybe you couldn't. Like if you want to be a teacher, that's great, but also have this stream over here, or a rental property here, or maybe I do a little selling on the side here, or I write a blog, and I, whatever that is to somebody today, it just gives you opportunities that, like you said, AI, all kinds of other things can affect your ability to earn an income. And what I have seen is people stagnate in a singular industry or a single income situation, and then they get very afraid. And what happens is they don't like what they're doing. They don't like their boss that they're dealing with, the stress of it, the hours of it, the conflict that it causes at home, whatever that is. But they feel trapped because I don't have any other avenues.
Yeah, there's no movement at that point. You have single income, and that's your primary source.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that would be my encouragement. Try to find ways to have streams, even if they're all relatively low at this point. It allows opportunity for growth.
That's good. So kind of as we're moving towards a close here, you have had a vast experience with leadership and team development, and I would say probably the majority of my listeners at this point are small business owners who have teams of one, or they are a solopreneur, or they have teams less than 10, like that. And looking at the America industry of entrepreneurship and business ownership, and like that is the most common experience, is that you have a team of less than 10 on the big side, and you have a revenue of $500,000 or something like that. Is there, you have led so many different teams from 10 people to 50 people to 100 people to 500 people. Like, is there something that you can impart to the listening audience that says, if you're going to lead a team, just make sure you have these things right, whether it be these pillars or essentials to a team dynamic, to make sure that things are running at least in a direction that's positive, or as well as they could possibly go?
So we had a philosophy at the place that I worked at for many years, and it could be boiled down to do the right thing. And that means even to your own detriment, meaning your team needs to be your priority. And one of the things that Craig Rochelle always talks about is the team gets better, or the team wins when the leader gets better. So when we talked earlier about leading yourself, I think it's critical, regardless of the size of the team that you lead, is to get better at what you do. Learn to communicate better. Learn the skills of that particular job better. Learn to sell better, whatever your particular position is. But treating people right, doing the right thing for your customer, doing the right thing for your employee. And sometimes that means firing somebody. Like, that's one of the things about corporate America that's so difficult, is getting rid of that person that's the bad apple. So sometimes it's the harsher love, so to speak, because your love for the team is greater than this person's disruption. So that's an important thing to learn. But communication, I think, is the key overall.
That disruption is actually, I had a conversation this week with a business owner, and we were talking about disruption and the pros to that, and like the huge benefit of disruption, and how uncomfortable and unfortunate it is. And we were really honing in on, for his particular business and industry, that 2020 was the most difficult and profitable year he experienced because of disruption. It forced growth, it forced new learning, it forced people to navigate in new ways. And I've actually had that conversation like 3 or 4 times in the last month, of where like disruption is almost crucial, but it's something that I feel like, even in my experience in industry, is that we avoid. We say, no, we just want status quo. We just want things to be the same. Don't be disruptive. Be silent and quiet, and just keep yourself going the way everything's gone. And yet we see the benefits of disruption and say, oh my gosh, I want the benefits, but we don't want the process?
So I'll give you an example over the course of my career. When lawyers tend to be conservative in nature, meaning not politically necessarily, but they don't like change.
Okay.
And they like it the way it's always been.
Mm-hmm.
So when we would create teams that would be reviewing our clients' documents, every single conversation with a senior lawyer at a law firm, they would say, we need the team here. We need to be able to supervise them because I might want to walk down the hall and talk to them. I've had this conversation 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
It never actually happened. They never walked down the hall, maybe once at the beginning when they said hi. But in those days, I would fly into cities. We would hire lawyers in that city where the client was or the law firm was, and we would train those people. We would identify who would be the team leader, and then I would come home.
Mm-hmm.
And we would then just call and talk remotely. And that was sort of the status quo. Then we started to argue, what if we brought these people into specific centers where their focus wasn't on that law firm, but they were focused on their team, and they moved from project to project, but they were all trained in our methodology. They all knew our best practices. Mm-hmm. They did it the same way every time. And so instead of having cities, like in every city where we had projects, we'd have to create a team.
Right.
We would have the same team in Nashville, Atlanta, Dallas, Memphis, Chicago. And we had these centers where lawyers would come to work. We would get the projects and they would work in those centers.
Right.
So that was sort of a developmental thing where lawyers had tended to say, we need to see our team. Mm-hmm. Instead, we said, well, fly down here. You can see them anytime you want to, but they're here and they're experts at what they do. It saved the client money. Everybody loved it. Well, then 2020 happened. And again, one of the things that had always been said in the industry was that remote doesn't work. Mm-hmm. How could you possibly supervise people remotely? That's bad. That's the late. They're going to be in their pajamas all day. That means they're lazy. All these stereotypical responses.
Yeah.
Well, in March of 2020, we sat down. There was a group of 5 of us in a room, and we had to figure out how are we going to take these 250 lawyers that we had working on these projects that today sit in our centers, and tomorrow or by next week, they need to be able to function remotely. Mm-hmm. And we had to go through this whole process of not just from a technical standpoint, but from a leadership, monitoring, motivating. How do you manage a team remotely? Zoom was very unknown.
It was in its infancy.
There was no Microsoft Teams. I mean,
right.
As lawyers, we'd never used this stuff.
Right.
And so we had to figure this all out on the fly. And what we found is that we jumped from 250 lawyers working in 5 specific cities to 800 and then over 1,000 at one point, lawyers working nationwide. So our business just exploded because of this disruption, as you say, this interruption of the normal that provided us opportunity. Because now those same lawyers that said that we couldn't work remotely had to work remotely themselves.
Right.
So they figured out how to do it.
Right.
We figured out how to do it, and everybody was happy. And I won't get into the whole push to come back to the office, and that's a thing, and I'm okay with that for some. But for our industry, this was the best thing that ever happened from a economic growth, from a mentality shift, from the ability to go remote. So now we have teams working, we have people working on teams in every state. They're just spread around the country.
Right.
That would never happen because you couldn't afford the space, and there aren't enough people in Timbuktu, wherever.
Right.
But there's that one lawyer that's really good, and we want her to work on our teams. So that mind shift really, really happened in 2020, and it's been exploding ever since.
So disruption doesn't always feel good, but it can actually be one of the greatest things that happen to us because it does force us to think outside of our normal boxes.
And it provides energy for the change. Whereas unless there's a catalyst, a lot of people just don't like change. But when it's forced, in the sense, then all of a sudden new opportunity is visible that before you couldn't see.
Well, Barry, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And if people want to find you and get your advice to being a coach or read your blog or like, follow your journey and is like, I would love to have you back on in a year and see what the journey and the process and the disruption and where all that creates. It's like, where can people find you, be involved, get advice? Like, what is the plug, Barry? Go.
Well, you can just Google Barry Willms. Just spell it correctly, because if you spell Barry Williams, you'll get the guy from the Brady Bunch. But certainly my information's on LinkedIn, on YouTube. You can see my music channel on beingaleader.blog. You can see the blog. I've written some articles recently that you can find just by searching my name. So yeah, I'm out there on the internet.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for giving us your input and perspective of career and what it means to be a lawyer. And I mean, to be honest, it's like the most non-lawyer lawyer conversation. It's so funny to have, grown up knowing a lot of these stories, but it's just a different it's different than what people expect. And if we're being honest and fair with most industries, that's probably the same narrative, where if we were just to ask the right question, we could learn so much from other people, and it's not like anything we ever expected. And to me, that's exciting. That's why, part of the show is created to be able to ask business owners and career people, like, what does it actually look like to do what you do? Because it's not like what I see on YouTube or Instagram or anything else. It's not that I started a business yesterday and I make $10 million this first month, or I started out this career and I always knew that I wanted to be an attorney. Like, you know what? The majority of us probably just happened to fall into something and we made the best of what happened. And that almost sounds sad and kind of like
It's reality.
fatal, or but the reality is we do what we do for our communities, for our families, for the things that we want in our lives, and our career is part of that, our business is a part of that, but more often than not, my experience is it's not the center focus of every single thing. So it's really been fun to have the conversation today where that is true in your experience and in your story. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Very welcome.